Back in the late 80s, I was working out on a remote cattle ranch in one of the United States. As you might guess, big cattle operations require constant security, and back then, that's how I earned my living. It certainly wasn't a glamorous job, and honestly, it was mostly pretty dull and routine, but I didn't mind it. During one particular night shift, I found myself on high alert. A few days earlier, someone staying in the on-site dorms had reported seeing an intruder wandering around the property. When security investigated, they found absolutely nothing, no sign of anyone, no footprints, no clues. But that night, while I was doing my regular rounds, I was a little more watchful because, in my experience, when you see smoke, there's usually fire. I was patrolling near the cattle sheds, walking with the ranch dog named Duke. The cattle sheds at night could be kind of creepy. They weren't loud or noisy, most of the cattle were already lying down or resting, but there was an odd vibe, a kind of quiet buzz in the air that comes from being close to so many living creatures. I can't really explain it, and I'm not someone who's poetic about these things, but the place just felt different that night. When I spotted the man, I wasn't much surprised, honestly, like I had been expecting to see him. Even now, I can't quite say what he was up to when I caught him. He was just wandering around aimlessly in the area right near the cattle sheds. From a distance, it was clear he didn't belong there. How could I tell? Well, the guy was wearing what looked like a wolf hide or some kind of wolf costume. I flicked on my flashlight and called out to him, ready to release Duke just in case he ran. Instead of running, the man turned around to face me. He stared straight into my flashlight beam, not blinking or squinting, like he wasn't fazed at all. I stepped closer, keeping my hand near my holstered gun, and the guy looked me up and down as if he was sizing me up. I didn't like the way he looked at all. His wolf costume wasn't some cultural thing or a costume for fun up close. You could see it was an actual wolf pelt, some kind of rug or skin he was wearing. Other than that, he looked like any normal guy from our state, maybe a little taller, a little more muscular. But the way he carried himself suggested he was pretty tough. I told him to identify himself and explain why he was on private property. He didn't seem the least bit intimidated. He stepped forward as I spoke, and what caught my eye was the wicked-looking knife hanging from his belt, partially visible under the wolf fur. That was enough to set Duke off. I started growling fiercely. The man stepped closer still, and I told him to stay put and to tell me what he was doing there. He paused, and as I lowered my hand from my holster, I moved to release Duke. Then suddenly, that wolf-costumed guy threw back his head and let out a terrifying howl. That's when Duke, usually the brave ranch dog, got spooked at something I'd never seen before. Usually our dogs were pretty calm, but this howl was so intense it scared him right off his leash, and he bolted into the night. My heart sank. There I was, just me and Mr. Wolf, or should I say Wolfman. I wasn't sure if this was some kind of elaborate prank or what, so I started to laugh a little, thinking it was just some kind of weird stunt. But then, the guy turned to look at me with a sneer, and he started laughing himself. It hit me almost immediately. This guy was clearly mentally unwell, and I probably should have radioed for backup then and there. But instinctively, I just did what I thought was right and called the police. I spoke into my radio, telling my coworkers to call the cops and have them come down. I never took my eyes off the man who just stood there perfectly still, almost taunting me. And it was bizarre because the whole scene was so surreal, wrapped in that wolfskin rug with a wolf's head sitting crookedly on top like something straight out of a horror movie. After a moment, I asked him again who he was and what he was doing on the ranch. That's when he finally lost whatever patience he had. This time, he charged at me with shocking speed. 1 second he was just standing there in that costume, and then he was barreling straight toward me like a linebacker. I barely had time to react or even draw. He was on me in an instant. Now I know what some of you might think, maybe I'm slow or my reaction time sucks. But honest to God, this was so sudden I didn't see it coming. I replay that moment in my mind a lot, trying to think if I could have done anything differently, But honestly, he was totally unpredictable, and I think that's what made it so terrifying. He knocked me down hard, and I hit the ground with a jolt. And to my surprise, he was on top of me, choking me with that wolf head still on and staring right into my face like it was some cheap Halloween costume. I bucked and wiggled, mostly just surprised and angry more than anything else, and somehow I managed to throw him off me. By then, I realized that a commotion was happening from the cattle barns. The mooing and stirring from the distressed cows told me my fight had woken them up. It was one of those moments that sticks with you so strange, so unsettling. I was being attacked by some lunatic dressed as a wolf while the cattle were panicking, the noise echoing in the quiet night. Just then, the dog, who had bolted earlier, got his courage back and came charging back barking loudly. That startled Wolfman, who hesitated and backed up momentarily, sizing up the dog. I was scrambling on the ground, trying to find my bearings, waving my flashlight across his shadowy silhouette projected on the barn wall. Duke was barking furiously, and I swear those two were barking and yipping at each other like they were arguing until I heard shouts and footsteps rushing toward us. It was John, one of my coworkers, showing up with a shotgun way more prepared than I was. Seeing him rush in, you'd think Wolfman might back down. Instead, the guy threw his head back and gave another god-awful howl. That primal scream still gives me chills to think about. I got to my feet fast, ready to handle this thing, and John didn't hesitate, swung the shotgun and cracked Wolfman right in the head with the butt. No stumble, no hesitation, just a perfect shot right to the forehead. The guy went down like a rag doll, crumpling onto the ground, knocked out cold. By the time I reached him, John was already cuffing his wrists with a plastic tie we kept in the truck. The police and the farm manager showed up shortly after. In the end, Wolfman was revealed to be the brother of the farm's manager who had come into town, gotten drunk, and then decided to pay his brother a visit. When he sobered up a little, he told them it wasn't supposed to be violent, that he'd just come to see his brother. But somewhere between planning it and arriving, he'd snapped. He'd acquired that wolf costume, a wicked-looking knife, and apparently an urge to cause chaos. Looking back, I realize it was a pretty terrifying incident at the time. But I also have to admit, I was pretty proud of how I handled Ipless. The boss made sure I got better shifts and a raise after that. Still, even after Wolfman was taken away and sent home, I couldn't help but feel unsettled whenever I patrolled the farm at night. His face, sneering that way, kept coming back to me, and hearing the cows mooing loudly in that eerie way that will stick with me forever. It was a bizarre experience, for sure, but it's one of those moments that makes you realize how unpredictable even the quietest countryside can be. And honestly, sometimes the scariest stuff isn't about ghosts or monsters, sometimes it's just a lunatic wearing a wolf costume, charging at you in the dark. And now, shifting gears a little, I want to tell you about a story from my childhood living with my family on a farm near a big old ranch. My dad was the foreman, so our family lived right there on the land, surrounded by acres of fields and machinery. It's a tough life, but also a good one. Hard work, early mornings, long nights, but full of honest, simple living. Our farm specialized in growing grain, sweet, corn, rice, and had several silos where we stored everything. These silos are big metal tubes, sometimes nearly as tall as a skyscraper roost, to hold and store harvested grain for shipping later. Growing up, we were always super wary of these structures. The law even imposed restrictions on kids working around them after some tragic accidents years ago. My mom always kept us cautious, warning us that falling into an empty silo could be deadly, but the real danger was when they were full of grain. She'd tell us stories about grain entrapment, how people could get caught and suffocate slow and painfully. One day, when I was about 12, I was walking with my dad and my younger sister, Ellie, near the silos. Dad was showing her how the machinery worked, and we didn't think twice about safety cause we thought the safety rules were obvious. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Papa froze and started pointing at me strangely. He shouted that I was trying to kill him and wouldn't let himself be taken. Before I knew it, he grabbed my wrist and started dragging me toward the machinery. He was surprisingly strong, much stronger than I would have expected from an old man. I was a teenage boy, not weak, but I hesitated, worried about hurting him. Still, he yanked me closer, screaming that I was an enemy trying to kill him. I remember we were near the grain cleaners, and he was shouting about how I was trying to destroy him. I couldn't make sense of his words then. It all just felt terrifying. He was trying to force me to the machinery, and I realized how dangerously close we were to the rotating parts. Grain was pinging against me, dust filling the air. I knew I had to act fast. I fought to break free and somehow managed to lift him up off the ground. Wasn't small or frail, though he was old. It was like one of those stories where someone lifts a car. I barely knew how I had the strength to do it. My main concern was getting him away from the machinery, not hurting him. But he didn't like that at all and thrashed wildly in my arms, causing us to topple backward. I let go quickly and spun around, grabbing onto the side of the silo to hold myself steady, just inches from the spinning blades. At that moment, he grabbed my head from behind, trying to force my face into the machinery, screaming threats I couldn't even understand then. The heat from the machine and the gritty dust was in my face. For a second, I thought I was done for, like a hungry animal about to strike. I kicked back hard, hitting him and knocking him away, which gave me just enough time to escape. I dragged him farther away from the silo, shouting for him to get a grip and come back to himself. Luckily, others heard my shouts and came rushing over. My dad grabbed us both, pulling us apart. I sat there trembling, exhausted, while I watched Papa wandering off, confused and disoriented. That moment broke my heart because I knew deep down that everything had changed for him. He was no longer the man I'd known all my life. He had these rare lucid moments after that, but that day was, I think, one of the last times I saw Papa as the strong, dependable man I loved. The sudden violence from his dementia was shocking and terrifying, and it became clear that his mind was slipping away. Eventually, he had to go into a care home, and visiting him there was heartbreaking. I could remember the man he used to be. But I also remembered that terrifying farm day when my own family almost lost me, because he'd mistaken me for a threat. That's a moment I'll never forget. And moving on, I come from a farming family that used to own a pretty large grain operation. We sold the farm some years ago because running a farm these days is just too many expenses, not enough profit. But I look back on those days with a lot of happy memories. We worked hard, played hard, and lived simple, honest lives. Our farm had fields of various crops and a bunch of silos for storing everything, a place most people who live outside the city would recognize as typical farm country. Those silos, those huge metal tubes, were everywhere. Some were fairly tall, some as high as multi-story buildings standing on sturdy bases. We didn't have the fancy modern ones you see now, but even the simple silos had a commanding presence. We understood enough about how they worked. Basically, they're large, cylindrical metal containers filled with harvested grain, wheat, corn, or rice that gets stored until it's time to ship it out. Growing up, we were always told to be very careful around farm machinery, silage choppers, harvesters, the silos themselves. All that stuff is dangerous. One careless move can cost you a limb or even your life. My mom was strict about this, give us a danger speech every time we went near the machines, warning us what could happen if we slipped or fell or got caught. When we looked at the silos, though, she'd get serious and remind us that climbing up them was forbidden. If you fall into an empty silo, you probably won't come out, she'd say. Back then, we didn't really think about the true dangers like falling into a grain-filled silo and getting trapped. My understanding was that falling into an empty silo was dangerous enough, and we assumed they were usually empty. But I later learned I was way off. The real risk was when they were full of grain, because if you fall in then, you can become trapped, suffocating slowly as the grain shifts and settles around you. One particular incident sticks out. I was about 12 and out in the field with my dad and my little sister, Ellie. We were walking past the silos, just chatting and enjoying the cool day with some light rain. Suddenly, Papa froze completely and started pointing at me, angrily yelling that I was trying to kill him, that he wouldn't let himself be taken by me. I figured he was joking at first, because that's so out of character for him, was usually quiet, serious, and kind of sedated. But this was a sudden, violent outburst, and he started screaming. Before I could process what was happening, he grabbed my wrist and started dragging me toward the grain machinery, surprisingly strong for his age. I wasn't weak myself, but I didn't want to hurt him or fight him too much, so I hesitated. That only made him yank harder, his old strength shocking, merely knocking me back. He kept yelling about how I was trying to kill him, that I was some agent of destruction. We ended up near the grain cleaner, a big piece of equipment with big rotating rollers. His words didn't make sense at the time. All I knew was I needed to get him away before he did something terrible. As he lunged at me, I finally fought back, pulling him away from the machinery. His raving kept going about not letting me take him, about how I was dangerous. I was so close to the danger zone that I could smell the oil, see dust swirling in the air. I realized I had to act fast, or both of us might get seriously hurt. With a burst of strength I didn't know I had, I hoisted him up, just like those stories of mothers lifting cars to save their children. I think it was a moment of pure instinct. I only cared about getting him away from the machinery, not hurting him in the process. But he hated being manhandled and thrashed wildly, knocking us back down. Quickly, I let him go and grabbed onto the side of the silo, just inches from the spinning blades. That's when he grabbed my head from behind, trying to force my face into the moving parts, screaming gibberish about how I'd regret this. I could feel the hot metal against my cheek, hallucinations, and real danger blending in that moment. My survival instincts kicked in. I kicked him away, sending him stumbling back. I then dragged him farther from the silo, shouting to him to come to his senses. By now, people must have noticed the commotion because I heard sirens and footsteps. My dad was there, grabbing us both, pulling us apart. I sank to the ground, exhausted and shaken. I looked over and saw Papa wandering off, confused, his face full of that lost expression that broke my heart. I knew, in that moment, that my Papa was gone, his mind fractured beyond recognition from that day forward. He'd have these rare moments of clarity afterward, but I knew that day marked the end of what I'd known. That sudden violence, born from his dementia, something I never expected, made me realize how terrifying this disease can be. Eventually, he had to go into a care facility, and visiting him was heartbreaking. Sometimes I could see the man he'd been, but I'd also remember that day and what he'd seemed to have become, an unfamiliar stranger, a horror I never imagined living through. And just so you know, I come from a long line of farmers. We sold the farm years ago because it's just too hard to keep going. The equipment, the regulations, the costs, it all adds up. But I treasure those childhood memories, walking up before dawn, working hard on the fields, living honestly. Our farm had a bunch of grain silos, those big steel cylinders you see in the countryside, and we knew all about how dangerous they could be. The law even restricted kids from climbing or working inside them because people have died, or gotten seriously hurt, inside those things. My mom used to scare us straight by talking about limbs caught in machinery or falling into silos. She'd warn us about the danger, but also emphasize the importance of respecting those structures. I guess she had a gut feeling about something one day. One memory that sticks with me is when I was about 10, standing near the silos with my dad and sister. We'd been told not to go near or climb them, but that day, I remember a sense of unease. We all looked up at those massive structures, knowing they could be dangerous. And my mom's advice echoed in my mind: if you fall into an empty silo, you might not come out. Don't climb. But I never fully realized how deadly it could be when the silos were full of grain. And sure enough, a few years later, tragedy struck. Our trusted worker, Uncle Rick, went missing one day. It was unusual because he was incredibly reliable, never took sick days, always around. Then, suddenly, he was gone. My mom and dad grew worried, and my little sister Ellie, out of nowhere, said she saw Uncle Rick on top of the silo late at night, something she'd seen when she went for water. That turned out to be true. My dad and some workers went to check, and there, inside the silo's hatch, they found Rick's boots, jacket, and watch neatly placed as if he'd deliberately gone in. And then, the grim reality hit. They pulled his body out of the silo, and I'll just say what they found was horrifying. He'd fallen in, drowned slowly as the grain kept him trapped. The way his face looked, the state of his body, no need to go into too many gruesome details, was enough to make your stomach turn. Rick had gone in, probably intending to do something, and then losing his way or giving in to some terrible impulse. Maybe it was mental illness or maybe an accident, but he stepped into that dark, suffocating world and never came out. That's a moment I'll never forget, seeing him lying there, helpless, surrounded by grain, and realizing how fragile life can be out on a farm. Since then, we've all been more cautious around those silos. They're still there, but with a new, cautious respect, because sometimes the real monsters are just things we see every day, hiding in plain sight.